Well, I'm curious about whether you feel there are opportunities for us to improve our own business model in our industry. To characterize what I see happening too often is we get an RFP from IT departments who specify exactly what their systems need to look like.
Right.
And then they get weighed and measured by Morgan Chambers and Equitera and Co.
Right.
Through the lifetime of our contract, and it just cuts through the inflation of the brain.
Right.
I find that what we sell is often very bespoke. It's not practical. We don't get the learning curve advantages, and we don't bring to bear full value of the innovation that's been described in here.
Right.
Do you see
yeah, so you're speaking of IT services, right? It's absolutely true that, by the way, there are very gifted and talented CIOs, and I'm seeing more and more of them taking on an innovation role. So they're also chief innovation officers in some cases. But the classic behavior of trying to re-engineer IT for lower cost is worth doing. It's definitely worth doing because IT services actually wasn't on the bubble chart, but it's also very wasteful. Okay, we all know that 10 to 20% of servers' capacities are used, right? So there's no question that IT services can be re-engineered for lower cost and better quality. Okay, but at the same time, you've got to be preoccupied with how do you use that IT to change what those companies are doing, and you've got to create that as a parallel conversation. And that could involve a CTO, it could involve a line of business. So increasingly, the lines of business have to play an equal role with the implementers of the technology. The SRII model emphasizes that in the two-dimensional structure. But it's absolutely essential to actually work out from the data center and work into change. And if anything, that's what I've tried to show you today, examples of doing that. The last question was, we seem to, in the IT services, we seem to be reduced to an RFP or a procurement process, and this is not delivering the best value for either the procurers of that process, who's often a CIO, or those who are delivering those services. We're not sharing innovations, and we're not being innovative. And the answer is, we've got to change that. Right?
So one of the topics that has come up in the work on the 6th that we're doing is the sharing of data. The sharing of data by enterprises in the open forum with anonymity so that research can occur around the world and everybody gets to leverage. However, there's a typical tendency to hold back for a number of reasons, for competitive advantage or whatever. So what would be your message to the executives here in terms of, should they continue to exercise that restraint, or should they liberalize, or how would you give a comfort feel for those people?
So I'll hand that question over to Chris for his comments, but my recommendation for SRII would be learn from the great institutions that have come before us. IEEE, ACM, the SIAM in mathematics, American Physical Society in physics, right? American Society of Mechanical Engineers. Fantastic 70 or 100-year-old organizations in some cases. They've confronted that, and I'll tell you, like device technology is as or more competitive than any service business, and yet they produce beautiful conferences where the most advanced work in lithography is described every year and exchanged. And so they allow their scientists and they encourage their scientists to exchange their latest, greatest results. Of course, they patent, right? But they also exchange, and they strongly encourage competition, not just in the business sense, but also in the intellectual sphere. And why? Why do they do that? Isn't that a leakage? I mean, wouldn't a straight-laced business person stop that publication? No. Because his people become better, the whole industry advances faster, it doesn't go into Baumol traps, right? And also, because if he doesn't do that, he doesn't get to keep the best people. So we've got to learn from those great organizations that have come before us, and we've got to get, at SRII, we've got to get top quality papers that are surprising, change people's minds about how things are done. And actually push the edge, work at the boundary of whether it's publishable and whether you can get it approved by your company. We need to be having arguments about whether it's publishable or not just publishing things that we know we can get approved.
Good point. I think as we discussed yesterday about the subject of cooperation and competition, this is exactly our strategy. We're going to, yes, maintain that balance, but we're going to keep pushing the boundary.
I would like to hear your comments on the issue of data ownership when we try to get into that cloud in order to search for information to do the work. And also the issue of the fallacy of exhaustiveness in data. People have a tendency to think that every information can be found on the internet or somewhere out there in the cloud, but maybe there are certain critical information that might be missing in that cloud.
Yeah, yeah. You've just highlighted, so the question was about the availability, the privacy, the ownership of data, and you're highlighting an extremely important point that we've been working through actually for a number of years in all kinds of industries, for example, the entertainment industry, right? And we haven't found a really good solution yet, although I'd say things are getting better in the around music and videos and so on. They're getting somewhat better, but it's still a huge problem, and in fact, it's, the issues of IP have become extremely problematic in that industry. And we do risk some of those issues being felt in other industries as well. Now, some of the interesting effects that we've seen, there are a huge number of industries around the world which are surprisingly relatively non-competitive. Okay, so I could use the other, for example, cities. Cities are trying to do everything they can to provide the best for their citizens, and they don't necessarily want to own IP or restrict IP. So that would be an example. But in the end, this is a technologically induced problem, and in the end, the only sustainable long-term sustainable issues, whether it's IP ownership or privacy, and there are huge risks, and there are even leakages today around personal information in healthcare, which are scary, okay, some of the stuff that's leaking, right? If I could use the analogy with industry and pollution. So industry, the smokestacks, in the Industrial Revolution actually created massive pollution and created all kinds of problems. The only solution to that, we're not going back. The only solution to that is smokestack scrubbers, which burn extra coal to fluidized beds to clean the coal, okay? So that's on us. We're not going back. So therefore, we have to create techniques like homomorphic encryption, techniques that allow data to be processed in an encrypted form, so you can actually do the value-add job on the data without ever being able to actually understand the data. That can be done. In a relatively few instances today, that can be done, but increasingly, those kinds of techniques. Those are fantastic research problems. They're very hard mathematical computer science problems. And those are the problems we're going to have to work on and solve if we're going to break through those issues, and those issues are not going to hold us back.
All right, I'm sure you have a lot of many other questions. I'm sure Robert will be around during this conference, so please catch him during the research forums and other networking time to get all your questions answered. Thank you, Robert.
Okay.